We're joined by Secretary Pompeo, our ACLJ Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. And Secretary, I want to get right into it. A lot of different topics I wanted to hit with you today. And first off is that when President Biden took office, we had inflation at 1.4%. It's now at 6.4%. Yesterday, he released what I would consider a disastrous budget that calls for $6.9 trillion in spending. Even his really outrageous tax increases, 25%. And they always say for the wealthiest. And you start looking at that, you say, oh, that's a lot of small business owners that would have a 25% mandatory tax. How do you see this all playing out? Because there was some discussion, Secretary Pompeo, yesterday that maybe some things in the economy that we were coming out of some moments and that maybe this would hold off on some interest rate hikes by the Fed to let people kind of settle in. And then you get a number like this, and I think and with $6.9 trillion spending that can't even be paid for with extremely high tax rates. And I think it scares the American consumer. It certainly scares the American employee and employer.
Well, Jordan, let's just take one step back. We know this is the case. Every family knows it's the case that you can't spend more than you have. And what President Biden is proposing to do is spend an additional $6 or $8 trillion, depending on how you count it, in spite of the fact he's going to try and take more money from every family. And he says it won't impact people under $400,000. If you're working for a small business that makes $1 million a year, this is going to impact you because your employer is going to have to make a really hard decision about whether to keep you at the company or to change the nature of what they're doing. And we know this is the wrong direction. When you have inflation, when you have prices going up for milk and eggs and all the things that ordinary families just have to have and depend upon, you know this is bad for the country. You know this is bad for those families. And the budget that has been proposed, which the good thing is it probably won't get very far, but the budget's been proposed, shares with you his vision for America, a bigger federal government and less money for families all across the country.
You know, I think Secretary Pompeo as well, it's just people, I think, look at all these economics, they say just this is like their only option is let's just increase interest rate, increase interest rate, increase interest rate. And you get to this certain point, you start looking back historically, you go, okay, when is this going to finally stop so that people can, one, just have some stability if they are making a large purchase to know and plan, and then two, just to, again, kind of get prices back down to where they are reasonable, because the unemployment numbers, while those are at the one side, so an uptick in the unemployment's low, more people getting hired, we still know that those wages, Secretary Pompeo, that people are making, I'm sure you're hearing this from across the country, are not covering the inflation. So while they are taking jobs because they got to pay their bills, at the same time, they're not able to pay all of their bills, or they're having to make serious cuts in their just basic lifestyle because their salary that would have covered everything a couple of years ago now does not.
Jordan, it's so true. When you're just out there meeting with people who are just trying to take care of their family and get their kids into good schools or coach their little league team, all those things we do here in America, they can feel this every day. They can feel it when they fill up the tank of their car. They can feel it when they go to the grocery store. They can feel it when the monthly bill comes for their electricity, for their natural gas into their home. They can all feel it in these deep ways. And you're right, paychecks just aren't keeping up with inflation. The solution can't possibly be what President Biden is proposing. His theory of the case is take more money from the private sector and take it to Washington, D.C. That won't improve the lives of these families. I remember this so well, Jordan. Right, mortgage rates when we left 2.5 years ago, just under 2.5 years ago, were about half of what they are today. So someone who's trying to buy their first home today, their interest is going to cost double what it would have cost. That's not good for people in the great places in America that President Biden doesn't think about very often, instead of just thinking about the folks he knows in these big cities and the liberals and the elites on the coast.
We're talking to Secretary Pompeo, also former director of the CIA and a member of Congress. During a hearing this week, which was pretty interesting to say the least, Secretary Pompeo, the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, we saw Democrats, this was interesting, repeatedly lash out at a New York Times editor, Nicholas Wade, who was one of the first people to say, and I guess at that point probably didn't think it was necessarily brave to say, but just a theory that COVID likely resulted from a lab leak in Wuhan. And yesterday, the ranking member of the subcommittee, a Democrat, California Representative Raul Ruiz, essentially called Wade a racist. I mean, for saying that this originated in a lab in Wuhan. Mr. Secretary, you said time and time again, we've got to be able to hold the Chinese accountable, and that hold them accountable has to be bipartisan. Why is the radical left using the language of the Chinese to try and scare us away from blaming a nation state and trying to conflate that with blaming all people who happen to be Chinese or of Chinese origin?
It's the dangest thing, Jordan, and you and the ACLJ have been all over this from the beginning. We knew in March of 2020, 3 years ago now, that the dang virus came from the lab. And the fact that the progressive left is trying to give the Chinese Communist Party a free pass on this is absolutely mind-boggling to me. It's mind-boggling, too, that Dr. Fauci is going after the former CDC director, Dr. Redfield. Dr. Redfield and I both knew in the end of 19, beginning of 20, we knew that this came from the lab, and it's important. It's not just, this isn't just a political parlor game about where this came from. To hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable, there has to be a consensus on the science, and the science is clear. This was an accidental release from the lab that the Chinese Communist Party then foisted across the world, and they have to be held accountable for that. And as long as you have Democrat congresspeople who are going to come after reporters who are just purporting basic science, we can't protect America from this happening one day again.
You know, if it happens to the reporter, it happened to Dr. Redfield. And we talked about that a lot yesterday on the broadcast, but you brought it up, Secretary Pompeo, is this idea that, I mean, when he testified with Congressman Jordan, and he said, you know, did you ever get this note from Dr. Fauci that he received from another doctor that was close to Fauci who said, this is doesn't look like an evolutionary kind of virus. This looks like something created in a lab. Someone else wrote to him, another colleague, a doctor, said, this would be tough to happen in nature, but certainly we could do this easily in a lab. And Redfield both times said it was never shared. I mean, they go after the New York Times editor. They were silencing the CDC director.
They had a vested interest in that, Jordan. They knew that Dr. Fauci knew that there was his money from his organization at NIH, and a fellow named Peter Daszak, that you all at ACLJ have been working to solve this mystery for a long time. Peter Daszak and Dr. Fauci both knew that there had been money that came in the form of grants that made its way to that very virology institute. They just wanted to protect themselves. It was a cover-up operation for sure. So that's why when Dr. Redfield came and said, here's the basic things we've seen. 6 doctors coming from the lab. Now they've disappeared journalists who are reporting on what happened to the lab. A researcher who said, hey, we really need to check out what happened in this lab. The Chinese Communist Party shut that all down. And when Dr. Fauci saw that, he had the exact opposite response. Dr. Redfield said, let's get to the bottom of this. And Dr. Fauci said, we can't let anybody get to the bottom of this. Let's go DEFCON 4. Let's cover this up. And that's really a threat to America.
You know what, Secretary Pompeo, as always, I appreciate you joining us. And through those questions, there's always the information I want to jump right back on, because I think, again, that silencing of just ideas is so dangerous in the United States of America.